Good afternoon and welcome to the College of Education Dean's Speaker Series. My name is Deborah Hassan. I'm Assistant Dean of Community Engagement in the College of Education. And on behalf of the Dean and our administrative team and our colleagues, it is our pleasure to bring you Dr. Enrique Murillo to speak to us this afternoon. I just want to say a few words about him and his career, and then I will hand over the mic so that you can hear what you came to hear. Enrique Murillo is a full tenured full professor at California State University, San Bernardino. He is in the educational research methods and foundations area of the College of Education there. He is a first-generation Chicano, born and raised in the greater east side of Los Angeles. And like many of us in the room, he's a native bilingual speaker of English and Spanish. He completed his doctorate in social foundations of education at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And his master's degree is from Cal State Los Angeles in the same area, with coursework toward bilingual multiple subject teaching credential. He offers both a generalist background in education and schooling, with cognate disciplines in sociology and anthropology. His areas include foundations of education, research methods, critical ethnography, educational anthropology, and cultural studies. Dr. Murillo is the founding editor of the Journal of Latinos in Education, and he's an editor-in-chief of the Handbook of Latinos in Education. Additionally, he's the founder of the National Latino Education Network. He currently serves as executive director and founder of Latino Education and Advocacy Days, LEAD organization, which is housed in the College of Education at his university. The primary objective of LEAD is to promote a broad-based awareness of the crisis in Latino education and to enhance the intellectual, cultural, and personal development of our community's educators, administrators, leaders, and students. Dr. Murillo is a former California Student Aid Commissioner. The California Student Aid Commission is the principal state agency responsible for administering financial aid programs for students who attend public and private universities, colleges, and vocational schools in California. He served as the president and chair of the Ed Fund board, and since 1997, Ed Fund has provided exceptional services to support students pursuing higher education. Established as a nonprofit public benefit corporation and auxiliary to the Commission on Student Aid, California Student Aid Commission, Ed Fund has worked to administer all activities associated with their participation in the federal student loan program. Dr. Murillo has authored more than 70 publications, has presented at more than 100 professional conferences, and is a recipient of numerous awards. I'm going to list some of his awards. Education Nation Thought Leader, California State University Forgivable Loan, National Hispanic Scholarship Fund, the Southern Oral History Award, the prestigious Outstanding Dissertation Award from Phi Beta Kappa, Top 5 Outstanding Dissertation Award from the American Educational Research Association, Outstanding Professor in Professional Growth Accomplishments, Outstanding Advisor, Outstanding Young Alumnus Award by the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, of which he was the first non-white person to receive that in their 230-year history. Educator of the Year, and the Outstanding Support of Hispanic Issues in Higher Education Award by the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Education. It is a great pleasure to have him here. The advocacy work he does on behalf of Latinos in higher education is amazing. If you're not part of his listserv, get on it, because they're doing great things, and he will tell you all about it himself. Enrique,
okay.
We give you a big Panther welcome.
All right, good. Thank you. Thank you. Gracias. Okay. It sounds like I'm an important person, but I'm really not all that important. At heart, I'm an activist, somebody who advocates on behalf of the people who are disenfranchised, and hopefully I try to see myself as part of a movement that helps channel concentrations of power over to the folks who have less power in our society. And in the academy, we're halfies. In other words, I kind of view myself, especially as a first-generation Chicano, born and raised in the east side of LA, Los Angeles, as one in, 200 million people who happened to make it to the university. And like many of us, especially those of us who were working class, not just being Chicano, But being raised working class, we oftentimes doubt ourselves. Do we belong here at the university? What are we doing? And part of my search in my career has been to create a model of activism where you can still be a university professor, you can still do what you need to do, write your dissertation, do the scholarly work, do your research, but at the same time, how does that benefit anybody other than myself and a few people who read, Great, I have more than 70 publications, and it's benefited, I know it's benefited in academic circles, but once you step outside the academy, it's harder to really say, okay, what have I really contributed? And so I've always seen myself as somebody who's walked on the backs of others. I'm a person who's very humbled by the fact that my parents came to the United States with very little resources and opportunity and created something out of nothing, and in a sense sacrificed themselves and physically sacrificed their bodies, if you want to put it in those terms, so that their children can have a better life. So I'm benefiting, have a better life because of my parents. So here I am in the academy. I'm officially sanctioned by the university to produce knowledge, but whose knowledge and how does that knowledge serve the greater good? So that's part of my talk tonight. So before I talk, I want you to just watch about 1.5 minutes of a short video that we produced just for this trip here to Florida.
Tabula rasa, a blank slate. No mind could hold any helpful impression. We also all know these degrees are
Okay. Let's back up. Director of a large organization. It's called LEAD, Latino Education Advocacy Days. And every year we put on a summit, which is our marquee event, our kind of showcase event. And this year's theme is the crisis among the Latino males in the educational pipeline. And I'm here talking today, and in a couple days I'm talking at the Black and Brown Summit in Tampa. So and I'm very lucky. I'm fortunate enough that I'm at this Black and Brown Summit. They pick one African American keynote speaker and one Latino, and And I'm humbled and honored. I'm going to be alongside Magic Johnson in a couple of days, kind of giving a big talk. So for this Florida trip, we decided to talk about our theme, the Latino male crisis. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and hopefully recruit some of you into some of the projects that we're doing, which is our participatory model, based on basically raising awareness that there is this crisis in Latino education. There's a crisis overall, but unfortunately Latinos bear the crux of that crisis. So I always like to start with myself. Okay, so here I am right there. Innocent. Now I'm not so innocent, but I guess I was there, about a year old. I born and raised in East Los Angeles, a little community called Huntington Park. And Huntington Park, interestingly, Huntington Park is next to a city called Bell. And for those of you who don't know, because obviously the Cuban community is so large out here, that Bell on the West Coast is like the large Cuban American community. So I went to school with a lot of Cubans, so there's a connection there with the Cuban culture, and I eat my croquetas, go to my school, go to croqueta y ya sabes, ropa vieja and all that stuff. So I'm Mexican American, Chicano. I use the term Chicano. I use the term Latino, sometimes Hispanic, although less Hispanic. I also call myself Native American Indigenous. My mother is a member of the Tawe Yoreme. So we're a Native American tribe that exists on both sides of the U.S.-Mexican border. So I'm also, besides Latino, I'm also involved in kind of in our Native communities, rescuing and kind of preserving our old traditions as well. My grandfather, my mother's, was the last hereditary chief of our people. And here he is right here. He was a fisherman and a canoe maker. And this is where my mother grew up, in a little jacal, like a little hut. And so all 7, 8 people would they grew up in a hut. A lot of people don't think people still live like that, or that was a long time ago, but that's not the case. I mean, there's still people who live like that. And so that's kind of the origins where I come from. My grandfather was non-literate. I don't like the term illiterate. It sounds very degrading, but he was non-literate. And so I would go with them somewhere, and back in the old days, if you didn't know how to even write your name, you would use your thumbprint. So I remember being a child going with them, and the thumbprint was like your signature. Here's my father. My father was a union organizer. Also, both of my parents were from Culiacan, Sinaloa. Sinaloa is the second northern state, down from the Arizona. So it's the northwest part of Mexico. And my father was a union organizer, so I kind of became politicized because when I grew up in the union movements, being as a child, I remember we'd spent a lot of time, my father would be doing his union strikes. Back then, the unions still had much more power than they do now. But it was fighting for basic human workers' rights. So I remember kind of being politicized that way. There's his grandparents. So people always ask me, well, how did you get to the university? I mean, I grew up in an area that's you would call drug-infested, gang-infested, I don't know, all the different infestations. I don't know what you'd call it. But I didn't see it that way. A lot of people think the immigrant community is like dark and chaotic, and I don't know what they think, but my community was vibrant, right? It's vibrant. I mean, I grew up, yeah, you go buy your clothes at the swap meet, but the swap meet, it's happening. It's a whole underground economy that takes place in immigrant communities that people are not aware of. It's not particularly dangerous. Yeah, there's gangs, but if you don't look for trouble, then you're kind of okay, right? Plus, I grew up in a situation where I knew gang members. So if I really needed to, although I would, you would. There's people, right, that you can turn to. Hey, I'm having trouble with these people, but I got lucky, and I think a lot of it had to do with my parents and I think just being aware of their sacrifices and their struggles. Somehow, as a child, I had that sense of my parents are really sacrificing. They're working hard, and how dare I do anything other than just do my job, which is do well in school and go like that. So part of my history, if you don't know, I used to be a DJ. In fact, I was there's Ice-T. I was Ice-T's DJ for a while. I was part of the hip hop movement in the West Coast. So like to think of myself as one of the innovators of West Coast hip hop. So that's cool, for me. And there I am finally at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But it's a long road, and I quite honestly see myself. And when I talk about myself, I don't mean to be egotistical. I'm just trying to say, this is my story. What's your story? But it's important to know people's story because there's no amount of research that can capture the qualitative dimensions of what I'm trying to explain. And for all intents and purposes, it's practically a miracle, given all the odds that I experienced in my life. Given all these odds, everything that's against me, somehow I made it to the university, and not just an AA, but bachelor's, and then master's, and then the teaching credential, and then eventually a PhD. That's a long road, and so I wish I had a formula to say, look, this is what you need to do, but there isn't a formula. There isn't. There's only the advocacy that needs to take place, right? So, just for those of you who are not familiar, here's our educational pipeline. Okay, so here Latina, Latino, American Indian, African American, white, Asian American. So these are national numbers. Where I come from, particularly in the city of San Bernardino, we have as high as 50% dropout rate. Of course, it depends on what paradigm you're functioning, because we also can refer to it as a push-out rate. So it depends what you see the roles that schools are playing, whether we're dropping out or being pushed out, right? Now, so these numbers are a little. I think they fudge with these numbers because I've been around research a long time to know that these numbers are definitely fudged. We do not actually know how many kids leave high school. We really don't. But we do know is that our pipeline, that we're just talking about the high school and then post-bac and graduates. But the issue really comes from pre-K, right? And so in the Latino community, as high as 70% of our community does not have access to quality pre-K. 70%. Think about it. In the United States, only 30% of Latino communities have access to pre-K. And people say, well, why can't this and why can't that? Well, it starts kind of at an early age, right? And just to give you a sense there, American Indian, not too different. African American, same thing, not too different, that kind of stuff. And of course, as we know, the Asians have been out competing the whites for several years now. So Latinos were at the lowest level here. What we do know from the research is this, right? Latino students attend schools with fewer resources, staffing, and programs. That's self-explanatory. If you just look at the budgets, at the money that goes into different schools, right? There's fewer resources at these schools. We have a higher mobility rate of students and teachers, which means, students come and go, and teachers come and go. I mean, I taught elementary school for a number of years, and believe me, there was a lot of times where I just I can't deal with this. It's too hard, right? Eventually, after a certain amount of years, I said, the classroom's not for me. I'm going to go off and get my PhD and do other stuff. Why? Because what's more strategic than being a teacher than being a teacher of teachers? So if I can have access to these teachers, then maybe I can have more influence, right? We're located, obviously, in high poverty rates, racially segregated with academically segregated tracks, right? Less qualified teachers. I myself was a very unqualified teacher. I got thrown in the classroom with the emergency credential. I don't know what it's called here, but in California and about 15 states in the United States, they offer these emergency credentials, which means if you got a bachelor's degree and you can pass this test, go ahead. They throw you in the classroom. So that's what I did. I got thrown in the classroom. And it took me a few years, to kind of figure out what I was doing. This is a very important thing. We have more and harsher discipline. And that's part of one of the factors of the Latino male crisis. Lower expectations, and this thing called the handshake problem, which is, here's the school, here's the home. In my particular situation, I lived a bifurcated reality, right? My father was very clear. De la casa pa dentro estás en México, right? From the door in, you're in Mexico, right? And then once you step outside the door, you're in the United States, right? And so you go to school and there's one reality. Then you come home, there's another reality. Now, some children are fortunate enough that it matches. The expectations at home matches that with the school, and it all kind of works out. But what happens when your life is bifurcated, right? So it's one reality here, and so we spend a lot of our lifetimes kind of making up for that mismatch. Okay? As you know, statistically, since 1998, Latino children had already been the largest demographic in the U.S., right? But here's the thing. There is still a lack of awareness that there is this crisis in Latino education. And I say Latino crisis, and people they don't understand. I thought everything was good, right? I thought you guys got civil rights. I thought you guys had bilingual ed. I thought you guys had this. I thought you had that. Well, yeah, there's been a lot of progress, but since the Reagan 80s, most of the things have reversed. So bilingual education has been taken away in most states. There's a fight right now to maintain ethnic studies, right? That's being rolled back. We have to fight every year for a certain amount of financial aid to make sure there's a large pool of financial aid for the lower socioeconomic groups. All these things that we spend our whole lives fighting for it year after year after year. But there's still a crisis. Okay? What happens? Vulgarmente decimos en español, somos un chingo y seremos más, right? There's a lot of us. There's a lot of raza. There's a lot of Latinos, right? And there's more coming, right? And there's more being born. In fact, boom, another one just got born right now, right? Boom, there's another one, right? And so we're growing at a faster rate. All these things are happening. So what happens when you got a large population of people, but their economic situation is one that they desperately need formal education, need an education, right? Yet our educational outcomes are not keeping up to par, right? Somos muchos, right? Minoría más grande en los Estados Unidos. Sin embargo, nuestro logro educativo no se está igualando, emparejando, right? So, demographic growth, but our educational outcomes and attainment is basically the same as it was 40, 50 years ago. We had a conversation with some of the graduate students a little while ago, and somebody asked, well, how things are going? And I said, well, you could ask me 50 years ago, and I would have told you a very similar thing. It's been about 50 years. Yes, there's been a lot of progress. We've come a long way. So don't get me wrong, we've come a long way. But one thing is to provide access. The other thing is outcomes, right? So we're living a paradox where most people, especially when we're thinking about equity, they think in terms of access, where everybody can go to school, everybody has access, right? But the paradigm that I'm functioning and I ask people to function is to look at the outcomes. We want to talk about equity, you want to look at the outcomes. That's the thing. So, and yes, last couple of years there's been a surge. There's been more Latinos into higher education overall, but we're not crossing the finish line, right? Yeah, we're getting to college. We've done a lot to get you here, but now what? There's a whole other set of factors that come into play so that you can graduate. Of course, this provides an opportunity, right? The less Latinos who go on to higher education and so forth, or become productive folks, it provides a pipeline to prison, right? And so that's one of the consequences, is that social exclusion, educational failure, and economic insolvency. That's one of the results of having a lower educational outcomes. Okay, so let me share this with you. This is Novelas Educativas is one of our partner projects that comes out of our LEAD network, and what we do is and it goes back to what I was talking earlier. I can write a book, and I've written 10 or 12 books. I can write an article. I've written a whole bunch of articles, right? But it's not as powerful as showing you a video, at least in a lot of circles, right? With the common folk, con la gente, right? So we have this project called Novelas Educativas that we partner for the partner project, and we take the kind of typical Latin American novela, right? And we give it an educational theme. So we have different novelas. I wish I could show more with you tonight, but we have a novela of a young girl who's at the kitchen table trying to do her homework, and la mamá comes, hey, los trastes, what are you doing? The dishes are dirty, the house is not clean, and so the whole conflict between the mother and the daughter about los quehaceres, and the chores have to be done in the house, and that whole conflict. And then, so that's one of them. We have another one about financial aid, right? To make people aware that there's financial aid available. We have one that we just finished with Nick Cannon. Soy tu hija, soy tu niña. It has to do with teenage pregnancy. We have a bunch of novelas. So we made a special novela just for our trip here to Florida. So I'll show it for you. It's only about 5 minutes. Just let me leave off where we were last time. Okay, so there you go. Just for you guys, new novela. First ones to see it. I hope you liked it. that's part of the work that we do. Is we figure that showing somebody a novela tells the story just a little bit better than sometimes even more powerful than writing a book on it. So that's the kind of work that we do. Yes, there's a crisis in Latinoamérica, but just like in the movie, how do we turn the crisis into an opportunity? So part of our lead projects, we feel is we have to do something different. It's been 50 years now. I don't know, something innovative. So that's what we see. Now, of course, why are Latinos important? Well, I tell some folks, especially if they're at the retirement age, do you want to get a Social Security check, right? Because did you know, right, that you need a strong enough tax base in order to provide Social Security funds, right? And so who are Latinos in this kind of global society? Well, in the United States, we are a large portion of the tax base and, of course, the labor. So here are the opportunities, right? Increase diversity, consumption, investment pool. I think we're a natural tie with Mexico, with Latin America, with all these things. I mean, we're just we are an organic linkage like that. In the most simplest of terms, the strength of our educational system and its place in the competitive global economy depends largely. I should just change that, will depend. I said it already depends largely on the educational outcomes among Latino students. It hurts everybody. It's in everyone's interest that we work together to solve this crisis in Latino education. Right? That doesn't mean that you don't engage in to solve the overall crisis in education. Right? But Latinos, we're like the poster child. We're like the that's a terrible word. Sorry about that. We're emblematic is the term. We're emblematic of the crisis, right? Because we bear the crux like that. So our movement is called Netroots movement, and it's a combination of net, because we take advantage of all the internet-based technologies, right? And then roots, because of course we take the elements of the kind of the grassroots. So we call our movement a Netroots. And we believe that the solution to our dilemma is community activism and democratic participation. Now, we don't necessarily have to hit the streets anymore, although if it has to be, we may have to hit the streets, right? We don't necessarily have to jump in front of bullets or dodge trains, right? There's other forms of activism. So the idea here is the work takes place wherever you're at, right? If you're a student, then the work takes place as a student. If you are a member if you're a staff person who works in the financial aid office, then the work takes place there. If you are a professor, the work takes place there. That's the idea. The work takes place wherever you're at. So again, most of us, and right now our network is pretty large. We have more than 1,500 chapters across 32 countries, right? So we're pretty large, this organization, and but the majority of us are in institutions of higher education, which are criticized often for good reason, because we tend to have isolated ourselves, and we isolate ourselves from the surrounding context, and we're criticized for not being more engaged in the communities. Right? I'm actually very happy that there's a whole office of community engagement. And before I forget, let me thank Fabiola and Deborah and Dean Garcia for inviting me here. And I'm here with Patty. Patty, raise your hand. We're here together. We're here kind of making a little mini vacation out of it here in South Florida. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm very happy to hear you actually have an office called, and your campus president is actually very active in this in community engagement. Why? Because we've been criticized, and for good reason, for not engaging our communities. Although in education, we've always had, we by nature, we engage our communities. But I'm talking about the academy in general. So we have to climb out of the ivory tower and work directly or indirectly in those institutions and community, the multiple communities that we straddle, right? So that's important to us. So let me show you another quick video. This is a short one as well, of who we are. I promise this is the last video.
Housed at California State University San Bernardino, LEAD, the Latino Education and Advocacy Days, serves as an umbrella organization for innovative projects, programs, and events for the Latino community. LEAD's impact and success is grounded on solid research, collaboration, participation, and outreach. LEAD's marquee event, the annual Latino Education Advocacy Days Summit, draws tens of thousands of people in person and watching from around the world. The event tackles issues specific to Latinos and showcases working solutions from around the nation. LEAD also addresses local issues at the Feria Educativa College and Career Fair to promote college-going opportunities for local Latino families. The LEAD organization depends on significant participation and partnerships in the region and nationally, and strong interactive connections with Latino networks in the U.S. and Latin America, and with indigenous peoples throughout the world. The various LEAD networks agree there are important issues that directly or indirectly affect higher education institutions and the multiple communities they straddle. Those issues require colleges and universities to do the action work that is most relevant for their respective local communities, and in such a way that they can be used to inform and shape policy. Put simply, the LEAD movement engages the Latino community, and the singular most achievable solution to our educational dilemma lies in community activism and democratic participation. Netroots is one way to describe the LEAD organization's methods of awareness raising, education, promotion, advocacy, activism, analysis, discussion, critique, and dissemination of educational issues that impact Latinos. The word is a combination of internet and grassroots, reflecting the technological innovations, participatory democracy, and campaign-oriented activities that set LEAD's techniques apart from other forms of education and advocacy.
Are you ready to make a difference in the Latino community? Are you ready to connect with and be part of Latino educational leadership? Are you ready to find cross-sector solutions to improve the education and lives of all students?
Raise your hand. Step in and get involved.
Please join us as we convene those sharing a common interest and commitment to educational issues that impact Latinos. Okay, so one of the things that we deal with is identity and culture. This is across for all groups, but for Latinos in particular, we always have to talk about identity and culture, right? And of course, we're academics as well. So in the social sciences, we have our kind of our trinity, the big ones: race, class, and gender, right? We always got to talk about race, class, and gender. Okay, no matter what. Just for convenience sake, usually we talk about the three as if they're separate, but you can't separate the effects of one from the other. In fact, oftentimes it's so blurry we don't know where one ends and the other one begins. So we talk about all three. Of course, there's more, right? There's sexual orientation. There's language, there's religion, there's bodily politics. There's all sorts of things taking place, but those are the three big ones. So we treat it separately, but of course they're intersectional, right? We have to treat identity in the broader terms, right? Back in the old days, we used to treat identity. It was very psychologized. We would look at identity as, so nod your head if this sounds familiar. Somehow we're born, and then right around adolescence, we start forming our identity. And somewhere around adulthood, our identity is formed, and somehow we carry that identity for the rest of our lives. Okay, so that's very psychologized. That's the way we used to look at it. Okay, so I want you to look at it in a different way, if you don't already. That we don't have one. It'd be impossible to only have one identity, because one identity as humans does not equip us with what we need in order to survive as humans, right? So we have not one, but a repertoire of identities. And I don't mean multiple personalities like schizophrenia. I just mean that you have one identity that's in one context. So maybe at home, you have one, right? When you're around your buddies, when I'm around the buddies I grew up with, you enact a different identity. When you're around, when you're at school as a student, there's another identity. When you're on the playground, there's another one. When you are with your children, that's another identity. When you're with your parents and family, that's another one. When you are at the workplace, you have a professional identity, right? In the institutions, we professors, we enact political identities, right? We have all sorts of stuff. And so identity is not one, but it's a repertoire, it's multiple, right? And we improvise it, like playing jazz or something. We come up with it, right? Where no matter what the context. For the crisis that I was referring to earlier in terms of boys and men of color, there's substantial evidence, and of course this is common sense. We are exposed to a lot of trauma. We're exposed to a lot of trauma. I mean, some of our kids got to step over the dead bodies to walk to school. I don't know what terms to put it. We're exposed, and there's a historical trauma. Even as a Native American, we're still dealing with the historical trauma in our particular situation, as and just dealing with race in general in the United States, where race, kind of the history of genocide, cultural assault, linguistic assault, stealing of the land, all that stuff, we're still dealing with that. So there's a historical trauma, but then there's also the trauma of just kind of growing up, and especially in these impoverished neighborhoods, of what it is to be a young boy and witnessing, let's say, one of your friends being shot and killed, right? Witnessing friends that you grew up with getting lost to drugs and alcohol, right? I myself work as a volunteer chaplain, Native American chaplain. I go into the prisons, and I work with some of these wards and some of these prisoners. We do talking circles. We do a sweat lodge ceremonies. We work in detox centers, 12-step program. All these things. Why? Because drugs and alcohol has really affected our community. So there's a lot of trauma that we're dealing with, and of course, if you're dealing with that trauma, you think you're gonna be able to go to FIU, right? If you're dealing with that trauma, it's real difficult to get to where you're at when you deal with all this trauma. You can just read that on your own. Here's some of the stuff that we do, and depending on the time that we have left, I'm not sure who's monitoring the time. I can talk about all these different things because I know there's particular people in the room. They want to hear about the different projects that we've done, the different advocacy projects. How much time? Okay, all right. So just real quickly, LEAD is an umbrella. Of course, we like to use a metaphor that's more Latin American. So it's una hamaca, right? So instead of the umbrella, our metaphor is the hammock, right? So we're a hammock organization, and it encompasses all these things: the journal, the handbook, the NLEN, different partnership building, the networking. We host public forums, virtual classrooms. Of course, you saw video production. We do regional alignments. We work on policy. We put on college and career events, our feria. We do Cash for College. And of course, our marquee event is the LEAD Summit. So I'll just talk a little bit about these real quickly. So 20 years ago, when I started off, there wasn't a lot of information. Yes, there was research, but it was very sporadic, very here and there. Oftentimes, it was the same authors, the same people that would get published over and over. And so the first thing we did is, well, we got to create a journal. Now we're a tier 1 academic journal. It's peer-reviewed, scholarly journal. We're ranked 330 out of more than 20,000 journals. But it took 15 years to get to this point. And so we see all our work as needing to be research-based. So it's not just ideational. We're not just coming up with all these grand ideas. No, it has to be based on some kind of research, something that's verifiable, a problem that we can discern, something empirical, something based on field, being out in the field, that kind of stuff. So we started a journal, and I'm sure you have it here in your database. We're indexed in like 70 different databases. But you know, your ERIC, your EBSCOhost, your Wilson OmniFile, all the different common ones were there. So you have access to this. It's free to you. Of course, that gave away to the Handbook of Latinos in Education, which is sort of like a thick encyclopedia. And what we did with the handbook is we declared it as an academic field. We are now a legitimate field of study. There are a lot of university professors who, in their title, it's written in there somewhere that what they do is they study the field of Latinos in education. So what we did in the handbook is we laid it out. And here's the 5 sections. And I was lucky enough to be the editor-in-chief for this. It took us about 7 years to create it. A lot of work. But if you don't, you should get your hands on it if this is your particular field of study. It's sort of like lays out the foundations. Then we create the National Latino Education Network. What we found is a lot of universities, either intentionally or not, that a lot of both doctoral students as well as professors, they work in isolation. Very alienating. The university can be very alienating. I don't know how it is here. You guys are a very large institution. You all are a Hispanic serving institution. And so I just don't know the situation here. But in general, in the United States, you'll go to graduate programs, and it's a couple Latinos here and there, right? And then the professor, the professoriate, if you look at that, there's not too many Latino professors. So oftentimes we work in isolation and alienation. So what do? We have to reach out. One thing that Latinos that we're good at is that we're good at reaching out and networking, right? So I could get comadreando or whatever you want to call it, compadreando, whatever. We're real good at reaching out and so we're good at networking. So the NLEN predates the MySpace revolution, all right? So we're older than the MySpace. So what we did is we called it electronic barrio. We have a portal where people connect to, and we can start having conversations about the kinds of work that needs to take place in our community. Of course, I'll save the summit to the end based on our times. One thing you need to know is that LEAD is a volunteer-driven organization. Okay? So yeah, I'm a professor, so yeah, I'm a paid person, right? But everybody else is a volunteer. In fact, where I'm happy to say, for the 4 years in a row, President Obama has given us I need to add that to the list of awards, the Volunteer Recognition Award from the White House. So for 4 years running, our volunteers have won this. In fact, here's the pin. I'm wearing the little pin. One thing I forgot to add is that I was lucky enough, I've been to the White House twice, that President Obama used the handbook of Latinos in Education to help generate the educational platform. Right? So because of that, he mentioned that in several speeches. I got to go to the White House, be there. And Patty and I, both of us, went to the White House. But we're a volunteer organization, so when we put on big events, everyone who's there, they're there because they want to be part of a cause. They want to plug into something bigger. Okay. One thing that we do when we put on our summit is, yes, there's 1,000 or 1,200 people in the room, which is great, but we sort of do what this gentleman is doing here. We set up cameras. Right? Why? Because we want to collapse time and space, all those barriers, and we want the most amount of people to be engaged. So we put on a one-day summit. When we talk about the Latino crisis, we don't talk about it in deficit terms. We talk about these are the kind of solutions that seem to work. Right? These are the things that's going to help us get along. We have a partnership with NBC Talk Radio. So we broadcast it live on the radio, so you can listen to it on NBC Talk Radio. We have a partnership with Time Warner Cable, so you can watch it on the government channels. We webcast it across the internet. And of course, we're linked into all the different social media stuff. Okay, there's our impact numbers. I won't go into that, but we reach more than 18 million people doing these. What we found is that for Latinos in education, the same themes reoccur over and over and over. So when you're talking to people, if you do a kind of a narrative analysis, these are the 11. I'm sure there's more, but here's the top 11 of the things that go over and over. If you go to the LEAD webpage, which is lead.csusb.edu, you can find it. But something that's particular to the conversation we had earlier, Dean Garcia, is a couple things, right? One of them is build teacher and counselor education programs which have an explicit student home cultural component, right? So educators not only be sympathetic, but appreciative and sensitive to students' backgrounds and willing to structure the schooling experiences to be compatible with students. And here's the other one, create qualified teachers that have specialized knowledge and skills in language acquisition, biliteracy, and cross-cultural learning. It's not enough to be a teacher. We know, the research shows you can't just be a teacher and all of a sudden you're teaching Latino students. It doesn't work that way. There's whole other layers involved. Okay. In California, we have California ACR 137, which declares the last week of March as a week of advocacy for Latino education. I don't know if this exists in Florida, but if you're interested in working with your legislators, we will help you so you can pass a resolution as well. Here's our Feria Educativa. We have partnership with Telemundo, their El Poder de Saber campaign. I was lucky enough to be nominated by NBC News as one of their thought leaders. And what they do is that all the thought leaders, we get in a room and we think, right? And we come up with solutions. So Telemundo, which is part of the NBC conglomerate, 2 years ago we produced 5 television segments. You may have seen it. It's been running on Telemundo for the last couple of years. So 5 segments in Spanish on these issues, Latino education issues. And we put on a big Feria Educativa. And most recently, here with the Festival Cárdenas, we had, and I'm happy to say, that we had the largest educational fair for Latinos in the history of the United States. We had 130,000 families show up to our college fair. 130,000 people showed up. It was at a speedway, and we had Los Tigres del Norte playing. Of course, that's a big draw. We had free food, but what we found out is that we can't expect Latino families to come to us at the university. We got to go to where they're at. So we put on a big Feria Educativa, and I know you guys have had Feria Educativas here in the Miami area for a long time. So I know you guys do something similar. And then with the Telemundo, we reached 54 million viewers with our projects with Telemundo. We have a regional collaborative, which means even though we deal with international and national issues, we also see the need to collaborate here at the regional level. So in our region, which is called the Inland Empire, which is in our region is larger than 11 states here in the United States. We're larger than South Carolina, for example, right? So our area is real distance. It's really far from each other, and we have to do strategic alignment. What does that mean? What it means is that a lot of us are working in silos. So one group is doing this over here, which is great. Another group is doing this, which is great. But what about getting together and creating some kind of coalition-based agenda where we're able to sustain our projects, we're able to replicate them, and the last step would be to bring them up to scale. So one thing is, if you find something that works, we want to take advantage of that, and we want more people to take advantage of that. So we want to bring it up to scale. So that's one of the things that we do. We have another project called Cash for College. In our area, the schools did something very asinine, which was they let go, because of the budget cuts, they let go of a lot of their academic guidance counselors. So we don't have too many academic guidance counselors in our region, right? So what does that do? The kids don't know how to fill out financial aid. They don't even know there's financial aid available to them. So we had to pick up the slack. So we jumped from 8 FAFSA workshops, financial aid workshops, to more than 100, right? And so we've put on 300 workshops in the last few years. More than 11,000 we've helped more than 11,000 families get financial aid, and we've brought in about $56 million into what otherwise would have been unclaimed financial aid. The thing about our Cash for College, and part of this has to do because I served as the California Commissioner, which means I was in charge of financial aid in the whole state of California. Believe it or not, I had a budget of more than $9 billion with a B, and what are we going to do with that? You know. And so one of the ideas that came out of that was the Cash for College. So if you show up to one of our Cash for College FAFSA workshops, your name goes into a lottery, and you could possibly we'll add an extra $1,000 to your package. So that's one of the projects that we did. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm just gonna kind of go through some of these real quick. One project that we have now, and this is maybe interesting to you all because you guys are an HSI, which is a Hispanic Serving Institution. Do you guys know? Raise your hand if you've heard that term before, HSI. Okay, so that's not a lot, right? HSI is a federal designation, like the tribal colleges, right? Like the historically black colleges. What it means is that at least 25% of your undergraduate population is Hispanic Latino. And you are probably the number one numerically HSI in the whole United States, I would guess, right? Or up there. Yeah. There you go. So think about it. So so you guys are out here in California. We have 70, just in Southern California, 70 HSIs. So now I'm president of the Southern California Consortium, and what we do is all the provosts and the campus presidents and the directors of minority and whatever and the directors of engagement, we get together and we make decisions that are going to impact our region, right? Why? Because what happens here affects there and there and there and there. So this is one of our projects that we're working on. Here's the newest project, Binational Parent Leadership Institute. What we found out, and this will be the last slide because I know I've gone a little bit too far, is that the research shows you have a good teacher here and you have a strong parent here, that the child's going to be successful, right? So you have a good teacher, right, and a strong parent. So we can't just work with the schools, we got to work with the families too, right? And all our projects are, the unit of analysis is families. We don't work with students because we know students by themselves, students aren't individuals in the true sense. Our unit of analysis is the family, so we always engage families. So a lot of the parents become parent leaders. They go to these parenting programs, and it's great. But once they finish the parenting program, now what? So how do we get to these parents to the next level of leadership? How do you become a parent leader? How do you go in there? Because we know through the history of schools that the only thing that really has affected schools, other than, of course, shifts in the economy and shifts in federal policy, other than those things that take place in the larger context, is parents. Parents go in there and they start demanding and they start making things happen, right? So parents are pivotal to changing the educational crisis. So we work with parent leaders, and so this is a new one. It's binational, so we're working with, in this case, we're working with Mexico in our context, with Baja California and California coming together to take parents to an advanced level of leadership. Okay, so here's the last thing. I'm hoping to add, we're hoping to add FIU to our list of viewing chapters. All it means is that if somebody here at your university is going to watch our LEAD Summit, which takes place Thursday, March 27th, it's totally free. You can watch it on the internet. We will list FIU as a viewing, as a town hall viewing site, right? And the last thing is, if you want to be added to our listserv so you get announcements, give us your business card or write down your email address on a piece of paper and we'll add you to the database. So, I think that's it. Yeah? Hope I didn't bore you. I just try to give you as much as I can without speaking to anything specific, but now's the time if you have something. There's one in the back. Oh, I said the dean.
Address what are the three leading problems facing Latino students, Latino population that really play a major role in their educational achievement? And in your mind, what are the three most pressing problems that we need to address?
Okay. If I can go back to that one slide of 11, I think these are things that I think you all already know, but I appreciate you asking the question. Because someone in your position, of course, has to have this breadth of knowledge. But let me go back to this. There we are. There's a lot. There's a lot. But I would say for you, I brought up the two because the College of Education, of course, having this home student cultural component. I cannot emphasize that enough. Teachers and counselors and school psychologists and administrators are more often than not strangers to the very communities in which they serve. Show up at 7:30 in the morning, they leave by 4 o'clock, they're back on their way home. But you got to know the communities in which you serve, right? So we know from the research is the colleges, the teacher candidates who fare the best are those who know what they're getting themselves into, right? We have a lot of teacher candidates who are just kind of thrown into the classroom, and they after, I think, what is it, 3 to 5 years seems to be an average. That's a big one. We right now, I know I got frustrated as in the credentialing. In California, we have credentialing courses, but we have a lot of scripted teaching now. I don't know how it is here, but here's a script. So of course, in education, part of our problem has been the neoliberal discourse, the free market discourse, the idea that education is the primary function of our society, and therefore the economy should dictate everything. So schools is almost like the last truly public space that we have in the United States, the space where you can be around people that are different from you. It could be class, it could be ethnicity and cultural background, religion, and because of everything being privatized. Now, don't get me wrong. I believe in a lot of our projects are PPPs, public-private partnerships. We work with Telemundo. We work with H&R Block. We work with Cardenas Markets. We work with the Chevy dealer. So we're not afraid to deal with dealing with the private, right? But of course, there's this a big movement, and it's taking place since the Reagan 80s. A nation at risk, and of course that's where the term at risk came about. And so in my analysis, the term at risk is a continuation of the deficit thinking, and so as long as we're thinking in terms of deficit, we're not going to get too far. So because of the privatization, the neoliberal discourse, we don't even own the curriculum anymore. Houghton Mifflin owns the curriculum, right? I don't know. Sodexo owns the foods, right? Right? What's the bookstore? What's the other company that owns all the bookstores? Yeah, but at university campuses, who is it? Oh, okay. So it's Barnes & Noble. There's another one. There's two, and of course I understand you have to make decisions, right? But a lot of but this is a public institution, right? Like where I'm at. So we have to at least take heed that there's that whole discourse, neoliberal discourse in education that's kind of the undercurrent of where we're dealing with. But going back specifically, the idea that teachers oftentimes are strangers to the very communities that they teach in. So you got to know what you're getting yourself into, right? One of the ideas that I do in my classes, I have the students create a community asset map, and you go out to the community and you find out: are there more liquor stores than there are parks? Right? Do people own their home or do they rent? Where do people buy their clothes? Where do they buy their food? That kind of, you need to know, right? So I think for me that's the big thing, is knowing the community and creating some kind of organic linkage. There was another.
that are from environments that you may not have been exposed to growing up?
Well, it's along the same lines. You have to create organic linkages. You have to go out there. If you get invited to the quinceañera, then go to the quinceañera. Then you're going to get a firsthand idea of kids got a home life, right? Obviously. The only cognitive map a child comes to school with is the cognitive map that they get from home, right? And so part of the struggle I think of being a teacher is to shed yourself of the deficit thinking. The fact that the child speaks Spanish is not a deficiency, it's not a defect, it's not a whatever. It's actually a pedagogical resource. So if you can learn how to, with specialized knowledge, if you can learn how to take advantage of that cognitive map, you can tap into that map so then you can get the child to where he or she needs to go, right? So it is a lot of specialized knowledge. Unfortunately, and this is the case even at my institution, that nothing's going to fully prepare you for the classroom. There's just, anybody who tells you that, they're naive. No one's going to, you're just going to go there and you're going to see for yourself what it is. But I kind of see being a teacher as having a driver's license. Just because you have a driver's license doesn't mean you're a good driver. I mean, that means they let you into the classroom and somebody said, okay, come on into the classroom. But it takes a while and it takes effort to really kind of know. So you have to know the community in which you serve. I think to me that's the number one thing. Maybe funds of knowledge. There's a whole genre in education called the funds of knowledge. Henry Trueba, Luis Moll, those folks. The idea being that in order to not be a stranger, you gotta, that strong component, I think is the strongest thing. The teacher, as a teacher, you gotta know the context in which the learning takes place. Right? Yes, sir. You were talking about and there was another one right there. Another one. Yeah.
Families as well, and we're seeing a harder time for parents to stay together or to be married. So you have a lot of kids being raised by single parents. What do you see as the best way to help young Latino couples stay together as a family and raise their kids?
One of our partner projects deals exactly with that, with dealing with the family issues. I kind of look at it a different way. I used to work in a homeless shelter. I was a social worker, and I was fortunate enough to teach people how to read and write. And when you teach people how to read and write, it's really a magical thing because their gaze is so different. And I've had situations where I know women especially in this homeless shelter that they were coming to class, learning how to read and write. They had to hide it from their partners or from their boyfriends or their husband. Why? Because education changes, it tips the balance of relationships. So I'm not necessarily opposed to divorce, right? Because I've had women in these kind of literacy classes who they wake up to their own oppression, right? Because when you're, and Paulo Freire said it best, reading the word is reading the world. So as you learn how to read and write, you're also waking up to the oppression in your own life circumstances. So these women were learning how to read and write, but then they can start doing for their own. They don't have to depend on the man to do all these things. And in fact, in some cases, the man doesn't want them to learn. Why? Because it's part of the patriarchy in the home. So in that case, education is a practice of freedom. It's liberatory. So I'm in favor of, in that case, in situations like that, I'm in favor of that. But at the same time, what does that present for the child, right? I know, I mean, I'm divorced as well, so my children are products of divorce, and they're experiencing a whole thing of going back and forth between the parents. It could be a mess sometimes, and I didn't have to deal with that when I was a kid. I had a hard enough time just dealing with my own stuff, but imagine that whole dimension on top of that. So we work closely with one of our partners. We work with the Catholic dioceses, and the Catholic dioceses they have their own things where they help out. Of course, it's interspersed with Catholic dogma, and there's religious, obviously, direct overtones. But that seems to be the churches in the faith-based community seem to be doing that work. So in some cases, I think it's ni modo. I mean, the family breaks up, and sometimes I know it made me a better father. The irony is that I'm divorced, but divorce made me a better father. Right? That's a reality, right? At least for me. Yeah, yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
This might be a weird question, but when you say Latino, since we are from Miami and is that specifically Mexican?
Yeah.
Is that Native American Mexican or,
Okay, so it's yes and no. Okay, so of course this goes back a long way. Are we Hispanic? Are we Latino? Are we? Of course, we know from research that most Latinos, and I say Latino just for convenient purposes, just to talk in very general terms, but we know most Latinos or people from Latin American descent, whatever, they identify themselves with their nation. So, si eres cubana, puertorriqueño, salvadoreño, right? I'm Mexican. So our primary affiliation is almost always the nation state. But we know, again, from the global economy, that even the concept of the nation state is almost a useless category in terms of our identity. Why? Because borders are there for people, but not for capital. We were talking about this at lunch. So money can go anywhere it wants in the world, right? Companies, multinational companies, all these, they can go anywhere they want. But the borders are there. So yes, we identify with our nation state. So what I'm referring to when I say Latino, most of the research I'm talking to is pan. It's a pan-ethnic. For Cubans, of course, we know in the pipeline that the Cubans have always done a little bit better than the rest of us, right? If you look at the pipeline, the reason why the numbers are higher are because you add the Cubans in, right? But that's changed. Now, the last 5 years, now the Cubans, and even here in Miami, they're looking a little bit more like Mexicans. They're looking a little bit more like Puerto Ricans, right? So the whole effect of that first generation or generation and a half of I guess you would call it a social and cultural capital effect, that you have professionals coming from Cuba who left Cuba to come here and start over. And of course, if they're part of the professional class, then their children are going to fare better because they have more of that social and cultural capital. But unfortunately, we've seen in the case of the Cubans is that those numbers that's kind of fading away. And like I said, unfortunately, you see the new generation of Cubans in Miami, that their numbers are starting to look a little closer to the rest of us.
Dr. Murillo, what a privilege to be here today. My name is Olga Naranjo, and we're from Texas. My question to you is, in the last 3 years, through forming a nonprofit organization, we've reached 10,000 children in 6 events. And my question is, what kind of program do you request or recommend for the what's next? You get them excited, you talk about school, we have El Mochilón, we get them dressed for success to start school, we have El Juguetón, get them all empowered, ready to go. But what's next? It's 6 months later before I see them again. what do you recommend for all of us that want to make America a better place
Okay,
for
so-
all these children?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming. You came all the way from Texas. But what an honor that you came to Texas just to hear me speak. I'm very humbled. Okay, so one thing we know from the research is multiple times. You hit the kid multiple times. You can't just hit them once with information. Just like the families, we can't bring them once to a Latino kind of themed feria educativa, a college fair, and think that somehow that's going to flip the world. It's not. We hit them multiple times, right? So we have campaigns. One of our campaigns is, besides the feria, we do the FAFSA. We do webcasts. One thing that's different that most people haven't realized yet is texting. Some of our kind of research shows that even the poorest Latino is going to text. Something like 78 or 80%. Even workers, working class, they'll have a phone, right? And they're gonna text. So we have a project called Recados, which is R, K, and then the number 2 in Espanol, Recados, right? It's not fully developed yet, but we've done this project. Well, we'll send text messages. Now is the time to apply for college. Next week is the deadline for your FAFSA, your financial aid form. Here is a link to do this. Here is a whatever. Text messaging seems to work. Because of our funding, we haven't fully implemented it. We've just done it really small basis. But it's part of the overall strategy if you hit it multiple times. So if you just think just one time, it's not enough. You got to get them in the 1st grade, get them in the 4th grade, get them in the 7th grade. You got to talk to the parents. We have Super Sundays when we go to the churches and they'll give us 3 minutes to give an announcement at church. Boom, just a quick something. And then if you have any questions, come talk to me afterwards. That kind of stuff. So we hit them at the churches. We do this, we do that, and it's just multiple. I don't know how else to say it. That's the next. In terms of strategy, at least what I've seen in terms of advocacy, right? Yeah. Yes.
Presence of Teach for America teachers in your system?
Yes, one of our partners is Teach for America. Of course, I've been criticized for the same because Teach America, one way to look at it, it's part of the privatization, it's part of the neoliberal discourse, right? You're right. It's also been, accused of just kind of throwing people into, right? But there's a shortage of Latino teachers. And fortunately or unfortunately, Teach for America is one of the few people who understand that shortage, and they are willing to take on Latino teachers and put them in a classroom so they can get some kind of experience. So the answer is yes and no. Yeah, we work with Teach for America because we want to increase the pipeline. Until we have our own, of course, there's a big movement called Grow Your Own. I don't know if you all have your own Grow Your Own programs here, but one model is, again, since teachers and counselors and psychologists are oftentimes strangers to the communities, right, that they teach in, how do we get people who grew up in the neighborhood or in a neighborhood just like the neighborhood, how do we get them to become teachers, right? How do we get the paraprofessionals who've been in the classroom for 30 years? How do we make them a teacher? How do we identify high school students who already in high school, the girl says, you know what, I want to be a teacher. How do we get them early on and then create a pipeline And you know, we can figure out a way to streamline it and make it easier for them, get rid of the red tape, so they can jump into the classroom right away. And Teach for America is one of those projects that is actually increasing the Latino educator pipeline. And yes, there's a debate, but as you see, we work with all sorts of partners, right? So it's both good and bad. There's corporate interests, there's private interests. I personally like Teach for America for that reason, but it's totally legitimate. The criticisms, I think, are totally legitimate. And you know what those are, right? In terms of, so we work with whoever wants to work with us. One more? Okay, one more. All right.
No pressure, right?
This is great because, quite honestly, you give a presentation, you just try to present as much as possible, but the real deal is the conversation that we're having now, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming, Dr. Murillo. It's great to have you here. I think you did a really great job of tackling the disparity in that pipeline between Latino students and other groups here, but what about even the disparity amongst that Latino population, particularly as it pertains to immigrant youth who are coming in, who may have been educated in another country or have dropped out in another country, and now they're coming in well behind academically, but also as far as the language gap.
There's there's a good. We're about to publish an article here. If you have a chance, look up Alejandro Covarrubias. Alejandro Covarrubias, and he just did an analysis, and it has to do with exactly that: nationals, people born outside the U.S. and how they fare and in general. Of course, we know that. Immigrants in general are doing better. And a lot of it has to do with maybe the dual consciousness or the idea that U.S. is a land of opportunity. And so, especially where you came from, you know, you were worse off and now you're in the U.S., that there's more of appreciation for the opportunity. Latinos, Latin American nationals born outside the U.S. tend to fare better. But then what happens to the next generation? What happens to their kids and their grandkids, right? So a lot of the analysis that I'm bringing up today really has to do with the kids and the grandkids. But there is. So Alejandro Covarrubias, if you look him up, you'll find the pipe. You can actually see the pipeline. You can see of all the groups, Salvadoreños seem to be doing the worst. Right? Cubans are doing the best in terms of the outcomes, and so Central Americans are doing faring the worst, and then Puerto Ricans are pretty low as well, and then Mexicans were like in the middle somewhere. So that's a big issue, right? Of where were you born, and so forth. Of course, Dream Movement, right, is a big thing. And when I was commissioner of financial aid in California, my job was part of my first task was implement the California Dream Act. So we have the California-based Dream Act in California, and of course, I think I say of course because to me it's obvious, but we have a whole sector of our society who, for all intents and purposes, are American in every sense, although they were born outside the United States and don't have legal status, that they should be afforded the opportunity, access, and to get into higher education like the rest of us. ¿Algo más?
Can everybody hear me? Yes. I wanted to say thank you on behalf of Florida International University and the College of Education and everyone here. Your presentation has been exceptional and outstanding, and we have all, I think, enjoyed very much hearing you and engaging in this conversation. So let's give a warm round of applause for Dr. Murillo. Thank you to all of you for being here. I know we've got a few classes and a few professors here that brought their classes, so we've enjoyed the day and look forward to the opportunity of collaborating with you in many of these exciting projects that you have. Thank you, Dr. Murillo.
Gracias.